Recently, my friend let me borrow the GTX 1080 Ti. I'm not gonna lie, this guy brings back a lot of good memories. This was a great GPU, $700 back in 2017. That's $900 with inflation. I know inflation is a bit. For that though, you got the best of the best. It was 67% faster than the previous gen 980 Ti. And honestly, the 1080 Ti can still hold up in today's games in 2025. It's not like super glamorous. You're not gonna be playing at max settings or anything, but this is the type of value that we got 8 years ago. Nowadays, we've got the RTX 5080, and man, it is just so fast. You see it running in game here. Oh, wait, what GPU? Oh, that was a 4080 Super running there, because the RTX 5080, yeah, only like 10% faster than the 4080 in like every single case. God of War Ragnarok, 16% faster. That's actually a pretty good one there. Horizon Forbidden West at 4K. Only 6% faster. Last of Us Part 1, a pretty good one here. At 4K Ultra, it's 15% faster. Marvel Rivals at 4K, it's 11% faster. Stalker 2 at 4K, it's only 7% faster. Most of the time you play these games, I genuinely don't think you'd be able to tell which GPU is in the system. You had a 4080, you'd be completely happy with that, which just makes you wonder, why did Nvidia even go through the whole rigmarole of just, making the 50 series in general if the 5080 was going to start to look like this? At the same time too, 50 series, the stock of the graphics cards themselves have just been pitiful. You can't buy them at the right price. All right, they're all like $2,000 at the moment. We'll see when they even get restocked. We don't know if Nvidia has done this on purpose or if this has been a product of circumstance. We're not sure. Overall, just an embarrassing launch. You might be wondering, is like 80 class graphics cards, I'm singling them out, and it's because they've always been expensive. Like, they usually give you a lot of like high tier performance, usually beating the last generation flagship graphics card even by quite a bit, while being somewhat affordable, that if you want to spend more on your computer, then you could probably end up buying one. I'm just using the 80 class cards here because the 50 series, the 5080, we do have that card obviously, and it just represents all of Nvidia's strategy. All of the new GPUs that we'll be releasing aren't gonna be that much different than this one. The 5080 is something crazy how weird this card is, because we look all the way back to the GTX 1080 back in 2016. That GPU was 30% faster than the 980 Ti. The 2080 in 2018, that was 9% faster than the 1080 Ti. Not as big of a lift there, but people were pretty disappointed in that graphics card too. The 3080 though was a massive 30% faster than the 2080 Ti. That was a pretty large uplift. Even the RTX 4080, it was still noticeably 12% faster over the 3090 Ti. However, the 5080 as a graphics card doesn't come anywhere close to the RTX 4090. That was the 40 series absolute best flagship graphics card. 5080 does not come close to that. Games like Black Myth Wukong at 4K high settings at native, the 4090 is still 14% faster than this graphics card. And the 4090 is dating back to 2 years now. It'll probably be 2.5 years old, not even that far along from now. In Cyberpunk at 4K on high settings, 15% faster on the 4090. God of War Ragnarok 4K Ultra, 22% faster on the 4090. That's getting you above 100 FPS. Now the 5080 is still very good in this game, but 4090 is better. Usually the 80 class cards beat the last generation flagship. Horizon Forbidden West, 22% faster as well at 4K. Indiana Jones at 4K, the 4090 is 14% faster. Last of Us Part 1 at 4K Ultra, 17% faster on the 4090. I think you kind of get the picture, okay? The 4090 is on average like 15 to 20% faster than RTX 5080. This is like the first time, I don't even know, like since I've been alive, it feels like, that we've actually seen an 80 class card from the current generation not beat the previous generation flagship. Now you can apparently overclock the RTX 5080 and get a decent amount of performance out of it. Like in Cyberpunk, it does close that gap to the 4090. Now the 4090 is only 8% faster. In God of War Ragnarok, it really isn't that much different here. It's only 20% faster. It was 22% before. Last of Us Part 1 is 9% faster on the 4090 now. So you can overclock and get more performance, but like, let's be for real, guys. Who's all overclocking the RTX 5080? And even with the overclock, it doesn't beat the 4090. The 5080 as a generational uplift thing might be one of the most disappointing generations that we've seen in even quite a while. And this has been a growing trend for Nvidia. Every generation we seem to get less and less price to performance. The 1080 Ti back in 2017 was probably the last most exceptional GPU that we've actually seen. The RTX 2080, yes, it was faster than the 1080 Ti, but it did cost the exact same amount at $700 while having a VRAM reduction from 11 gigs to 8 gigs, which definitely didn't help the longevity of actually owning a 2080. And then if you do want to work up the stack, if you just look at the 2080 Ti versus the 1080 Ti, that got a $300 price increase up to $1,000. They already increased the price in one generation by $300, dude. We go to the RTX 3080 in 2020. This was supposed to be a great GPU because it's coming in again at $700, still matching the price of the 2080, but is being significantly, like massively faster than the 2080. The thing is, at the time in the circumstances when the 3080 came out, we never actually got to see this graphics card thrive because this took place during the chip shortages. This took place during COVID, and that meant like we just couldn't get our hands on this. These were being scalped by crypto miners. And that took the opportunity to just make these graphics cards cost an absolutely stupid amount. Then with the RTX 4080, Nvidia thought they could get away with a $500, that's a 70% price increase over the 3080. And this pretty much shocked the world. The 4080 was not that well received. From my experience, the 4080, it is a lot faster than the 3080. Like most of the time it's 30% faster. But this is the first point that we saw a regression in price to performance versus like 2 generations. 40% faster, but it costed 70% more. The 4080 sold so bad by Nvidia standards that they ended up refreshing basically the exact same graphics card, the RTX 4080 Super, in January 2024, and they just dropped the price of the 4080, $1,000, so a $200 knockoff. So, oh boy, you can buy a 4080 for $1,000 instead of $1,200. I know, people were riveting for this card. And that just leads us to the RTX 5080. Now, I will say versus the 4080, at least it wasn't a negative price to performance thing. So despite all these back-to-back flops from Nvidia, somehow they remain to be the most dominant force in the entire GPU market share. It's like, how? How has Nvidia managed to keep this up? It might be mind-boggling, I'm not gonna lie. I think we're gonna need their AI to figure this shit out. Nvidia is a public company. Nvidia has to make as much money as they physically can. It's a fiduciary responsibility. As a public company, you have to make your investors as much money as you possibly can. Which is one thing, like with the whole video game industry and stuff, like that gets me iffy with it, is like, I don't think creative works like video games should be public companies because it doesn't mesh with the interests of the company. Those should always be private. And that's why we see so many companies adding so much ridiculous monetization for video games when they don't have to be like that. Because being a public company can be a good thing. Like for Nvidia, if you make the best products, typically you end up making the most money anyways. But the thing is, the company's interests get misaligned with the consumer and they abandon the possibly original consumer to make as much money as they can in a different field. And that really does switch up everything. You see, Nvidia used to just be a gaming company. They were founded in 1993, where they just wanted to revolutionize the way that we compute graphics, especially on PC. Every innovation they made at that point in time was just to bring better performance and better price to the masses. They just wanted to render video games faster and more detailed than ever before. And then in 2006, that's when CUDA was introduced. CUDA basically uses the GPU cores to complete computing tasks, and different people can take different advantages of this. It really wasn't used that much up until probably 2012, when CUDA was first used to train AI models. These weren't very advanced or anything, but this was the first inkling of what was to come. Because it really wasn't until like the mid 2010s, I would want to say around 2016, 2017, where Nvidia started to prioritize data center GPU markets. And they started to take that a little bit more seriously compared to the gaming audience. Even though gaming revenue was still their top priority at the time, they just started to shift a little bit of focus to data center. And in 2020, That was the year where Nvidia, and actually 2021 and 2022, that's where Nvidia started to show their true colors. During COVID and the chip shortage, Nvidia was definitely 100% selling GPUs to crypto miners, whether or not they did it in the most overt, obvious way or something like that. And that meant that normal gamers that were Nvidia's main audience could not get their hands on GPU. Like, we could not get our hands on them. And at the time, there was a chip shortage too. So this basically put Nvidia in a very strategic advantage where they could sell a lot of graphics cards to miners, but at the same time, because there's limited supply to just us gamers out here, then they can charge so much for these graphics cards as well. This made Nvidia so much money. If you look back in history, Nvidia's stock soared quite a bit in this time. Then Nvidia also did another thing where they virtue signaled to the public, where they made these LHR graphics cards, low hash rate graphics cards. They weren't good for mining cryptocurrency. Virtue signaled that Nvidia was trying to make cards that wouldn't be used to mine on, but this might have just been pressure by the government or just to make them seem like they care, because we know where they're making most of their money at the time. Then in 2022, with these insane prices, you might as well sell a kidney to buy a 3060. You know, they just decided that maybe we're okay with these high prices. And Nvidia was like, we're gonna launch the most outrageous generation of graphics cards we've ever seen. They dropped an RTX 4080, the 16 gigabyte one, for $1,200. And that shit dropped like a rock to the bottom of the ocean. And don't forget that Nvidia also tried to launch a 4080 12 gigabyte graphics card, which was insanely cut down from the 4080, much slower. The 12 gigabyte one was so bad they unlaunched the graphics card, renamed it, and brought it to market at like a couple months later as the 4070 Ti. All the while this stuff was taking place, the AI market for companies was starting to have a massive boom, and Nvidia just moved on to the next grift. Whether or not it does end up being insanely influential in the future, we're still kind of yet to see. Whether or not this is a grift, this has made Nvidia one of the most valuable companies in the world. Now here we are, just normal gamers, you know, the people who made Nvidia the company that they are today. And what I think is a huge tell of where Nvidia's mindset is at the moment, because Nvidia actually announced this generation of GPUs way back in March of 2024. Blackwell GPUs were announced, mainly just for AI. And if you look now at the GPUs that we have today, RTX 5080, the 5090, you can see the die on them. The chip that is on them is labeled like GB203. GB202. And the 2 at the front is very important. That means that Nvidia didn't put it as a 1. That means that these dies that they're making for gaming GPUs are the second priority. The first priority are the ones they put on data center. Whereas compared to Ada Lovelace GPUs, that's 40 series, the chips were labeled for like the 4090, for example, it was AD102. They were prioritizing technically gamers at the time, but you know that, over the course, they didn't end up doing that. AI has completely eclipsed the gaming market for Nvidia in terms of revenue. And we just see here, this is their financial report. I know, boring shit. For Q3 2024. They haven't released their Q4 2024 one yet. That should be coming mid-February here, so we'll get that one pretty soon. Game revenue is still pretty crazy. It made $3.3 billion in just a quarter of last year. That's still a ton of money. But you might think that's a lot until you see the AI market, because this is literally 10 times, $30 billion. 10 times more money was made in AI data center GPUs. That makes me feel hopeless, I'm not gonna lie. And to most other companies, this would be okay, because this would just be, one part of the business is kind of separating and doing its own thing, while the other part of the business, maybe the legacy part, is still doing its own thing. But the thing is, GPUs are different, because GPUs aren't really made by Nvidia. Nvidia designs them and everything, makes all the software and all that kind of stuff. But the GPUs themselves are made by TSMC, which is a fabrication facility in Taiwan. They're very, very advanced, and a ton of different companies use them for how advanced that they are. Both their data center GPUs and their gaming GPUs need to have the latest fabrication, most advanced fabrication process in order to keep advancing. TSMC can only produce so many chips. So this means Nvidia has to choose. And we all know what they're gonna choose because data center makes them a bajillion dollars on every single GPU they make. It's crazy how expensive these things are. But also because they make so much money on AI, Nvidia also has to make the gaming segment as profitable as it can possibly be, which is why we're in the situation that we're in. Like, it'd be dumb for them to just give up on the gaming market and commit all to this AI data center stuff. They're a major foothold in the gaming market, so they should try to remain where they are. The 50 series graphics cards are a crazy example of this. Hardware Unboxed recently just made a video on how the RTX 5080 is actually more in line with a 5070, or what should have been a 5070. And here is the die sizes for these GPUs. So here, I'm gonna go and hide my face cam. You can take a look at this chart. Over here on the right side is the 50 series dies. Now, if you're not aware of what a GPU die is, that is the physical processor itself. And the size of this can typically mean how much does it cost the company to actually make the chip itself. 5080, so here's 80 class, the 5080 right here, as a die size of 378 millimeters squared. And what's funny, this is hilarious, that this actually is more in line with a GPU like the RTX 3070. The 3070 was 393 millimeters squared. That GPU is back in 2020. We go to the 10 series graphics cards. We see here that the 70 and 80 class were built off of a 300 millimeter squared, but the 80 Ti class was built on one much larger than that. So this one is a little bit odd, but you know, if we go back to 900 series, the 70 class card also lines in size with the RTX 5080. These are very, very similar, which means that there is no way in hell that the 5080 costs that much to make. It's impossible. Now the 5090 is like twice the size of the GPU. So that one makes a little bit more sense why it'd be so expensive. It even scales usually exponentially how much it costs because of yields and all that stuff. And if we even look at the 70 class card for the 50 series, this one is more in line. It's 263 millimeters squared. This GPU is more in line with a 60 class card from the 30 series. Or even from the 700 series, a 60 class card as well. They definitely have very good margins on these graphics cards. I wouldn't be surprised if on a 5080, if they actually sell that at $1,000, they're probably still getting 60, 70, 80% margin on that graphics card. Now, I can't know that for sure because there's a whole ton of stuff that goes on behind the scenes of how much these cards actually cost. That'd be around my guess. Nvidia's probably making a lot on these cards. And that is also most likely the reason why we're seeing on the market right now that there's barely any stock of the 50 series graphics cards. Kind of counterintuitive because you'd think they'd be easy to make, but Nvidia is prioritizing the data center graphics cards, and that means that they can make more of those ones. And then at the same time, just release a few of these 50 series, the 5080 and 5090, make this artificial sense of demand. And then that means that they can charge insanely high prices and get a ton of revenue for every single graphics card that is sold. Make this demand, even though these 50 series graphics cards really aren't that exciting. They really don't look that good. Nvidia marketed this on a multi-frame generation to get the performance out of these cards, and it doesn't seem like the reception of that feature is really that good. I'd be wondering, like, how does Nvidia get away with it? That's a damn good question. I think it's because Nvidia structures, they've used their market dominance to structure the entire gaming market around the technologies that they are pushing. That makes Nvidia almost like a monopoly in the space, because if you don't have the Nvidia graphics card, then you won't be able to use the Nvidia features. This can just be them forcing game rendering techniques when they are not at all necessary in the game. We've seen games that look great that are 10 years old now, that were photorealistic, that ran super well, but it seems like nowadays every single game is stupidly hard to run, and they're using techniques like DLSS. And DLSS is the best looking upscaling technology on the GPU PC marketplace, which means if you're not using DLSS, your game is going to look a lot worse until a competitor like AMD or even Intel can make a good upscaler. Nvidia has also been pushing ray tracing like crazy. It's been something, it's like whenever Nvidia introduces a feature, everybody has to listen. Everybody has to look at what they're doing, because you can't just ignore the ray tracing. A lot of developers have taken it on and actually taken it to heart, even though I don't even think that ray tracing is that big of a deal in a game. I have a 5090 because Nvidia sent me one. I don't even really turn on ray tracing that much. That's the goddamn best GPU to use ray tracing on. But if you go to any other graphics card, and this is something else that makes you want to spend more, because you go to any other graphics card in Nvidia's lineup, it can't really do that shit. Like, I'm not gonna ray trace on a 4060, even on RTX 3080. That's just still a fast GPU to this day. It stacks up pretty well against the 4080 Super and stuff. I'm not going to ray trace on that graphics card either, because it just cuts your performance so much. And really, the results in games just do not feel worth it. It's like, oh, you might get some real reflections in the game. Oh, the lighting in the area maybe looks a little bit more realistic. I mean, if everything could run it well, of course I would turn it on, but that's not where we're at right now. But the entire industry has shifted to that. Companies like AMD have been investing in ray tracing technology because that's where the industry is going. Companies like AMD have invested into upscaling technology. Even Intel, more even DLSS 3 frame generation ×2 mode, which was introduced in 2022, that came around. Every other company jumped on board. Every other company started to make these frame generation techniques. Like AMD introduced FSR 3 as soon as they possibly could. Even though to this day, I think frame generation on Nvidia GPUs and even AMD GPUs, or because FSR 3 works on all GPUs, I think it looks pretty good. I think it feels pretty good to play, but it's situational. It's not perfect. I think Tim on Hardware Unboxed describes it in a perfect way.
Previously, you'd use motion blur for smoothing out a game. Now you can use a much better version of motion blur that doesn't smear the presentation.
Nvidia employees behind the scenes have even said that they're just trying to make features that their quality is high enough that the other companies can't catch up.
This video came from like an onboarding interview with the source at Nvidia. Like something that they said that I put in this video is like they just want to make sure the quality is better and better, so that like AMD never catches up to like, especially like ray tracing well, upscaling is going on. It's all about the quality. It's not about the more frames. We got to ×2, that's enough.
It's basically like a little carrot on a stick. Or like you got a pig on a treadmill and it's just running, and other companies are the pig and they can't catch the goddamn carrot on the stick on the treadmill. And then that gets people to buy Nvidia GPUs, because these features in games become so essential that if you're going to buy a new GPU, what are you going to buy? Are you going to buy the one with all the features in it? Or are you going to buy the one that is actually probably more performant at a lower price, even though AMD's been messing up their generations as of lately? And we'll see if AMD does end up being pretty competitive with FSR 4, because from what I've seen, FSR 4 actually does look really good, so we'll see how it goes. Nvidia has no real reason to change their strategy or change what they're doing. They're making a ton of money as it is, especially on the AI side of their business. They don't change unless they end up, on the gaming side, start to face like significant competition from probably AMD. I will say that AMD's next generation GPUs actually do look pretty goddamn impressive. Like the 9070 XT might have performance on par with the 7900 XTX and actually beat the 4080, which isn't that far off from a 5080 in quite a few games. We'll see. That's the leaked performance up to this point in time. AMD, if they price his GPU correctly, it could go and just really be tough competition for Nvidia here. Though if AMD does make something that's very competitive, I would not be surprised if Nvidia just, takes a step back and they're like, ah shit, maybe we should squash this bug. They're getting a little bit annoying. So Nvidia could very well just drop the price on a couple of their graphics cards, because their margins are insane, and they could just destroy AMD. Let me know what you think about this. And it's kind of a doomer thing. I mean, we're hopeful for probably the future competition, but at the end of the day, it kind of sucks the situation we're in. There isn't really that much we can do about it, because gamers aren't that significant of a market for Nvidia right now, and Nvidia is going to do whatever they can. And you see with them prioritizing, future looking technologies, like getting into the robotics field with AI and everything. And Nvidia is trying to make the environment that they are the one that every company goes to, and that it's going to probably cement their future. And I don't think their revenue in terms of AI is really going to decrease into the future unless something like a huge DOJ, like Department of Justice, like breaks up the company or something like that. You can say vote with your wallet, but Nvidia has been as popular as they are. So despite everything, people are still buying them. I guess I'll see you in the next video. Y'all try to have a good one, and peace.